If you were to take any beginner's class in economics or finance, you'd undoubtedly learn about how investments grow over time via compound interest, right? But what if we apply this concept of investment and compounding growth to personal development? In today's episode of the Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers podcast, we discuss a variety of approaches to personal growth, healing, and development using this metaphor of investment and compounding growth. We cover the imperfectionist's approach, treating the mind like a garden, how to think about failures, dealing with discomfort or boredom, the importance of rest, clarifying your values, and much, much more. For those of you who are new to the show, welcome. Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers is brought to you by Numinous Network and is hosted by me, Dr. Steve Thayer, and my co-host, Dr. Reid Robison. Just a few quick announcements before we get into the episode. If you are looking for comprehensive foundational training in psychedelic-assisted therapy that includes live online classes, experiential learning, and opportunities to connect with a diverse community of practitioners in the psychedelic medicine space, then check out our courses. We're offering 10% off select courses to PTF podcast listeners, so click on the link in the show notes or go directly to numinous.com/training, and you can use the code PTF10 for 10% off. If you've listened to the show for a while, you've likely heard Reid and myself talk about the psychedelic clinical trial work that Numinous Network does. If you or someone you know might be interested in being a participant in a psychedelic clinical trial, you can click on the link in the show notes or go directly to numinous.com/research to learn more about the trials we're currently running. If you'd like to do us a solid and support the show, you can do so by leaving us a rating or review in places like Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and like the video, maybe leave a comment below, smash that subscribe button, and of course, share the episode with someone you think might enjoy it. Without further delay, here is today's episode on compounding growth, how to invest in yourself for lifelong transformation. So Reid, we've talked a lot about on the podcast about personal development, working on oneself, and I was thinking about it the other day through the lens of investing, and the way you get compound interest when you invest steadily over time. And so there are going to be a lot of metaphors we throw around today, but I thought we might revisit working on oneself and some of the potential obstacles that stand in our way, how to address those obstacles, and maybe some potentially counterintuitive ways of thinking about personal work and self-development. It's fun to see my kids, especially my 3 boys right now, really into the stock market and crypto. Like they're investing in quantum computing stocks, for example. So they awesome. Like they really have to assess that field a little bit, and they're trying to do day trading. That's exciting. But I think back of when I went through that phase, and a number of times, and realized that I would just get in my own way, in my head, and end up making like mental or emotional decisions that were not the best strategy. And I always just landed back on this simple strategy of dollar cost averaging. Like just set your investment on autopilot and do chunks of it on a regular basis and just forget about it. And then one day you look back, you're like, whoa, look what I've amassed from my investment. I think that I'm playing on your analogy of self-work because I think that applies. Yeah. I used DCA as a metaphor with one of my clients who's a finance guy of like, how do you dollar cost average into personal development? Slowly each day, disciplined and regimented, being present and compassionate with all the things that might pull you off of that trajectory, like you were saying with financial investing, making so-called emotional decisions but just pulling the levers that are reliable and long enough to make a difference over time. I think it makes sense as a metaphor for personal development. Yeah. And just to add a layer to it, I remember at one point last year when I was shifting my work responsibilities and taking, a sabbatical of sorts with some of my time. And then what you do when you have less, say, of that flowing energy to put into dollar cost averaging, you could consider taking a break, pausing it, changing it into smaller chunks, for example, which I did for a time. And I think that applies to self-work too, is Because I think about this a lot, how to find the balance of pushing yourself too much versus making consistent progress in the direction of your values, hopes, and dreams.
Right. So there are a few principles that I want to pull out of what you said that I think are important to cover. But I want to start with a section from Oliver Burkeman's most recent book, Meditation for Mortals.
And who's Oliver again?
So he is...
Oliver?
Let's see. Worked for many years at The Guardian, where he wrote popular weekly column on psychology.
Cool.
And then he wrote a book that I really love called 4,000 Weeks. British dude.
Sounds like it.
Described himself as a recovered perfectionistic productivity guy, making his second brain, optimizing his calendar. Got to make sure I squeeze every bit out of each moment, be productive.
A gifted psychology writer.
Yeah. And so 4,000 weeks is, about how many weeks we have in our lifetime. And so it was kind of a existential confrontation with our mortality, memento mori, and a perspective shift. And so this is his follow-up book, the subtitle being 4 Weeks to Embrace Your Limitations and Make Time for What Counts. So I just want to read the first 2 paragraphs of the introduction. This is a book about how the world opens up once you realize you're never going to sort your life out. It's about how marvelously productive you become when you give up the grim-faced quest to make yourself more and more productive, and how much easier it gets to do bold and important things once you accept that you'll never get around to more than a handful of them, and that, strictly speaking, you don't absolutely need to do any of them at all. It's about how absorbing, even magical, life becomes when you accept how fleeting and unpredictable it is, how much less isolating it feels to stop hiding your flaws and failures from others, and how liberating it can be to understand that your greatest difficulties in life might never be fully resolved. In short, it's about what changes once you grasp that life is as a limited human being in an era of infinite tasks and opportunities, facing an unknowable future alongside other humans who stubbornly insist on having their own personalities, isn't a problem you've got to try to solve.
Amen, Oliver.
Amen, Oliver.
Well said.
And, that introduction is entitled The Imperfect Life. And he talks about approaching life as an imperfectionist as opposed to a perfectionist. So I thought it was an important place to start to sort of look at personal development through this lens of imperfectionism and embracing that. I like the sort of, you're never going to sort your life out, because there's this sense as we work on ourselves that we're going to arrive somewhere. We're going to arrive to self-actualization and transcendence. And once we do, we're not going to have problems anymore. And most of us, if we're honest, will say like, oh no, that's not what I mean. I know I'm always going to have problems. But deep inside us is this hope that we'll figure our shit out. And once we do, things will just be easy and we'll be at peace.
It's funny to look back at a couple time points. Say a couple years ago, I was doing this deep dive on doing my work with a new kind of framework and trying it on. And I remember thinking, whoa, I don't get triggered a lot these days. It's hard to find those activations. Things are so peaceful and harmonious. And maybe I worked on all that stuff. And maybe this is the new norm, but then like fast forward a year and all of a sudden like stuff has come up that I'm facing on a daily basis, like stuff within me that I had no idea was there or still there or came up because of stage of life and how life goes. And like you're saying, the work is never done. So it was a striking reminder to me that it's not only never done, but like you could get blindsided by a whole pile of new work at any moment. And I think what for me helps a lot is the tools, the skills and confidence you get from practicing and working on yourself that prepares you for all that.
Yeah. Not only is the work never done, it doesn't need to be done in order for you to have a fulfilling, purpose-driven, delightful life.
Yeah.
Right. You don't have to exclude all the suffering or be in denial about it or try to avoid it in order to have those things. You have those things with the other. It's the yin yang. It's holding both of the, sides of the dialectic.
Should we ask Oliver to come on the show?
That'd be pretty cool. Why not?
Yeah. So,
a few things sort of related to this, maybe launching off from this perspective of imperfectionism. A metaphor I've often liked to use and think about when thinking about personal development or investing in oneself is to think of one's mind or oneself as a garden. And I was talking to some friends the other day at a men's group about this, and I have a tendency to just cast a lot of seeds on the soil of my mind. And what that looks like is collecting a lot of information. Like I'm going to read a lot of books. I'm going to listen to a lot of podcasts. I'm going to talk to a lot of people. And I think the secret hope is that I'll just sort of discover the answer. And as long as I cast enough seeds on that soil, something will take root and it will be what I've been looking for. But I think a better approach is to be judicious about which seeds you cast and to really, really focus some time, effort, and energy on those specific things, and that they might be informed by and enlightened by your values, and then tend to them, right? They're going to grow if you tend to them. And the areas of your garden that you sort of give the nurturing light and water or whatever of your intention are going to be the ones you grow. So be thoughtful about where you put that attention. You could be growing weeds, or you could be growing a plant that yields fruit.
I like this garden analogy for a number of reasons, but one is there's a book that our friend Pedram Shojai, the urban monk who lives in Park City, wrote, and I can't remember what it's called, but it's not hard to find.
Something like tending to the Garden of Life or something.
That's in it. That's the concept that one of the concepts I took away from that book that was the most helpful is tending to the gardens of your life. It just made me think of not just my mind and body, but my closet and my garage and my
relationships,
filing cabinet. My relationships that matter near and far, and working on yourself in all sorts of other ways. But, and then, I guess it was 2 nights ago, I was thinking about this. I've just started teaching yoga again.
Yeah.
And, after a long hiatus, a long hibernation, hiding, I don't know. But it's really fun to be back doing something I love to do. And, one of the secret recipes for yoga that I've discovered over the past decade has been, the combination of a practice that tills the soil of your garden, if you will, that gets you ready to plant a seed, and then the conscious, intentional planting of a seed in that fertile ground and letting it birth or manifest or grow, and how do you tend to it? But yeah, basically the combination of a yoga practice and a meditation approach of any kind, but like yoga nidra is a good example, where you're just relaxing into near sleep, but the perfect time to plant a seed of something and let it kind of move through you, let it manifest itself. Like with your awareness, you create this bridge to bring it into the real world, and then you start working on it.
Yeah, it's a great example of holding the tension between a disciplined, consistent practice and also imperfectionism, just sort of allowing things to change, allowing your attention and your interest to change. But you need to till the soil and have some kind of foundational practices to help you respond to the chaos, to the entropy of the universe and what it means to be a person. And so I think about that a lot, is this balance between discipline and focus, and then sort of the form and formless that you've talked about before.
Yeah. Can we take a brief poetry intermission?
Always permitted.
About imperfectionism. And I believe I have read this before on here, maybe long, long ago, but it's a poem by Jeff Foster called A Perfectly Divine Mess. And he says, Bow to your awkwardness, smile at your clumsiness, befriend your incompetence, laugh when you stumble and fall. These are all precious waves in the undefinable vastness of you. Perfection is unattainable in time, but found only in presence. The presence of imperfection makes you real, relatable, and that's perfect. You'll be consistent when you're dead. Until then, celebrate your silly old self, your marvelous inability to conform or to live up to any image at all. Don't bore yourself into a spiritual coma. Say the wrong thing just for once. There is such freedom in allowing yourself to fuck up. I'm just reading it as it is here, folks.
You can be forgiven. Yes.
To be kind to your mistakes, to kiss the ground as you rise again, and to adore the falling too. Don't let your spirituality numb your humanity, your humility, and most importantly, your humor. Jeff.
I like it, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah. I love it. It's such a compassionate and accepting way of looking at what one might initially think are their flaws.
Things you want to forget
or fix.
Are there.
Yeah.
Like, just hate or despise or like your inner dialogue just like bullies the hell out of.
Right. And this is, really difficult to do, to bow to your awkwardness if you feel like your awkwardness is responsible for a lot of pain in your life, for example. Mm-hmm. So we're not trying to paint this with a toxic positivity brush. It's more appreciating that these imperfections are not perfectible, some of them, right? Just sort of embrace the chaos a little bit. And that when you can do that, you operate from a more relaxed place where creativity can happen, right? If I'm not constantly perseverating on and obsessed with the fact that I need to change X, then I'm opened up to more possibilities. I get to see Y and Z and other letters in the alphabet.
Yeah, and another thing that just keeps coming to mind is that this quote from Thich Nhat Hanh that says, in the sunlight of awareness, everything becomes sacred. I'm just thinking about how we can live our lives on autopilot, or we can add some awareness into it. And we've talked a lot on here about how psychedelics can help bring about new levels of self-awareness. But all of this stuff can, right? Like doing your shadow work, if you will, working on yourself in any way. But for me, it seems that flips the switch of like doing the work or not. Like if you can just keep some of that self-energy, capital S self, that witness consciousness, that awareness on board, loving awareness. As you move through life, you can take an inventory of the ways, the silly things you do, and maybe laugh at it, observe it, and then figure out how to gently shift it into more adaptive versus maladaptive ways of showing up in the world, for example.
Right. And I've found that a practice that is particularly helpful for me and for some of my clients is this sort of self-compassionate oriented mindfulness meditation, where you choose to sit, and maybe you sit for 5 or 10 minutes, and maybe you pick an anchor point like your breath, but then you start just witnessing, like you said, taking the seat of the witness, everything that occurs in the vast field of your consciousness. And that could be a sensation. It could be a thought like, this is boring, or I'm bad at meditation. And as soon as you notice it, you breathe, you zoom back out, you create space for that and everything else. I'm having the thought that this is boring. And if you can come at it from this compassionate witness place, it starts to slow down the chaos of automaticity, of being sort of jerked around by your automatic thoughts and beliefs that maybe, were implanted in you by early childhood experiences. It's a really important orientation to come at oneself from, but also a practice. Like this can be a skill that you develop, noticing the nature of the mind. And then from that place, it gives you more options. Like I was saying before, I can then choose to deliberately focus my attention and grow the plant in my garden that is self-confidence, or that is self-acceptance, or that is compassion, or that is service, or whatever aligns with my values.
We are what we repeatedly do in a very real way. Like, as they say in neuroscience, neurons that fire together, wire together. We're these neuroplastic, malleable humans, and making those small steps, whether it's a thought or an action, repeatedly over time becomes a new default mode.
Right.
It's actually like, as a corollary, in psychiatry, it's like how TMS works, transcranial magnetic stimulation, which seems like this mysterious, weird contraption, sci-fi device, but it's mostly used for treatment-resistant depression, approved for a number of other things like smoking cessation, OCD. But when you sit in the TMS chair and put on like that helmet, or have the device pointed at a certain part of the brain, and when it turns on its MRI strength magnets and basically changes the spin of electrons to activate pathways that then light up the neurons and fire those pathways. Like in depression, we're aiming it at the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and we're hitting the button on the machine saying, give this person 2,000 pulses on this brain pathway today. And then we're going to do it again tomorrow, another several thousand. And by the end of this course, this month, we're going to have flexed the muscle of that like positive mood pathway 100,000 or 200,000 times. And you can do that out in the world in a number of different ways too, by directing your attention to what you think about. So just as an example.
Yeah, it's such an interesting sort of neurological example of habit formation and how it happens. You are what you repeatedly do reminds me of something James Clear says in Atomic Habits, or at least I've heard him say in interviews, that each of those actions is you casting a vote for who you want to become in the future.
I like that.
If I'm stuck on my negative thinking, I'm casting votes for sort of who I become, this self-hating negative person or what have you.
Oops, who did I just vote for?
Exactly. So yeah. Some other ways of cultivating a profitable investment in oneself that I want to run through. Okay. One is investing in boredom. So you've probably heard the phrase, don't just sit there, do something. It's fun to flip it around. Don't just do something, sit there. And my distaste for boredom is often what propels me into sort of numbing or self-distracting or not very constructive behaviors and patterns. So one of my biggest challenges with meditation was like sort of sitting there and then all of a sudden feeling the agitation of feeling like I needed to do something productive, something else.
Yeah, I run into that a lot these days. For several years, it's been something I've been observing in myself, or looking at, and trying to gently kind of have that awareness and make some shifts on. But yesterday I was in my home gym and saw was reminded of these couple art prints I have from an illustrator I like. His name's Tyler Spangler. He makes these trippy word arts. And one of them said, don't just sit there, in these cool letters. And I was like, interesting that I printed that like several years ago, but it struck me. So it's fun that you're bringing it up now in those same words, because it landed a certain way for me, because I have been trying to embrace in a whole new way the value of solitude, slowness, rest, and not reactively just moving to the next item to do. Yeah. And really checking myself. Just like we've talked about an awareness stance of, why is this substance or thing going into my body? Why is this thing coming into my life? Why would I be hopping in my car and going to XYZ right now? Or what is the most loving thing that I need or I could do for kind of myself and everything I love around me right now?
Yeah. In moments of stillness, you really get to know yourself, and it helps you be more intentional with what you do, like you're saying. And I think you mentioned rest. I think rest is another thing that we could put a pin in as investing in oneself, like really investing
literally
in rest, like literal rest, sleep, naps, recovery, resting the mind. And I think you can distinguish it from my point about investing in boredom, because letting yourself be still can be a form of rest. It can also be a form of active work. Like if I'm choosing to meditate and I'm becoming mindfully and compassionately aware of this urge not to submit to boredom, I am practicing being bored.
Yeah, that is some damn good work right there.
Yeah.
Sitting still doing nothing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, serves to help slow things down a little bit so that you can do what we've talked about a couple of times already. Just be more intentional and make those investments where they really count and where they'll pay off.
And before I ever taught yoga, this is like, say, 10 years ago or so, at least, I was leading a lot of meditation groups and was getting a bit frustrated with my ability to help guide people into a consistent practice that they could take at home. And the most common feedback that we've all probably heard from people about meditating is like, oh no, I can't, like I sit there and my mind goes nuts.
I can't quiet my mind.
Yeah. Like it's feels like chaos to start it. But, so that is the work, right? That is, and especially early on, it can feel a little daunting, but I know what I've seen time and time again, and what Oliver probably talks about in his book is just sitting with that, like you just said, is some of the most productive work too. And there is a lot on the other side of that. Like many practices feel absolutely kind of daunting at first. And then after 3, 4, half a dozen times, it might feel very different.
Yeah. The way in which it's felt different for me is not that I've quieted the storm of the mind. It's that I've learned to be still in the storm. Yeah. So it's not about thought suppression necessarily. Certainly there are probably meditation paths where you could get to a place of what feels like empty mind.
Yeah.
I'm sure that happens. I've heard Henry Shulkman talk about that, the meditation teacher.
And the yoga practices have different avenues of that, but they're way further along in the training of the mind, body, spirit.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be, like meditation for me is still of great utility, even if I never experienced that, like a totally quiet or empty or
most humans probably won't,
right.
like, and don't need to.
Yeah. It's more, to me, a more useful skill that I'm investing in here of learning to create awareness around the way my mind operates and finding a way to be still, or like Ulysses, tie myself to the mast, right? While the sirens are singing. I don't have to be compelled to follow. And
there is something that happens like in even the most basic of meditation, when you tune into the anchor of something like your breath or your senses, like feeling the earth under your feet, or even tuning into the hum of the air conditioner in the room, that I just learned is typically 30 to 40 decibels, by the way. And and normal breathing is like 10 to 20. Right, just fun facts. Yeah. It was an air purifier advertiser or something. So tuning into something, we talk about the breath as the nervous system's remote control, like the brain. You really can help create some space, not just in the way of like breathe yourself bigger that we were talking about, but just by anchoring your attention to something like the breathing or a sensation, that a lot of that chaos will then just naturally fall away. Some, right? Not all.
So maybe to summarize this point, it makes sense with your limited time and resources to invest in a practice like meditation so that you can learn the nature of your mind, so that you can find peace in the storm, and so that you can get some clarity on where you want to invest other energies, which plants in the garden, if I can mix metaphors, that you really want to nurture and water.
We mix metaphors around here.
Yeah.
So to finish my meditation teaching thought then, and like add to that is, so that's kind of why I landed on yoga, is it was partly fueled by this frustration of being able to get self and others to sit still long enough to, like, get to those, peaceful places of insight. And I found like some body-based practice to be a very helpful prerequisite to tilling the soil and getting yourself ready to be in that place. Like, as an example, I mean, you could be going on a long run and then just after you're, crashing on your couch at home, and like, how clear does your mind feel then? Or like, how alive do you feel with your heart beating? And, or in yoga, you've got this, like, doing these weird things, like these weird postures while you try and keep your breathing steady. And you're doing that anchoring all throughout, through all the chaos of your thoughts that come up and the self-doubt and everything. But then at the end, you're just like, okay, corpse pose, lay there, do nothing. One of the hardest poses for many people, but one of the most beneficial. Like, yeah. I had a yoga teacher tell me once that if you skip Shavasana, a unicorn dies.
Oh no.
That's how strongly they felt about Shavasana.
Oh, wow. Yeah, super important. Okay, so another way I think, another thing that might be helpful when trying to decide how one might invest in oneself is to audit your inputs. Whether we like it or not, a lot of what we think and how we think is influenced by the variety of inputs that come at us, whether it's from the people in our lives, the social media streams we use, the books we read, the podcasts we listen to. So that kind of my metaphor of just taking in a lot of inputs and casting a lot of seeds. It's really important to do an audit occasionally of, okay, well, I'm thinking these thoughts and feeling these feelings. How much are these thoughts and feelings the result of the inputs that I'm taking in?
Yeah.
How much inflammatory social media am I consuming?
How does the news impact you
Right.
and your mental, emotional, nervous system well-being?
Right.
Yeah.
What am I permitting in there? And also, like I briefly mentioned in inputs in the form of the people we hang around with, the people we allow into our sphere to influence us. We've talked a lot about boundary setting on this podcast, and it's so important, right? Because if you don't, then you're basically handing over control of what populates your mind to people that might not have your best interest at heart.
Yeah. It is interesting to look at how you feel coming out of different interactions, like energized or like defeated, exhausted,
Ashamed,
frustrated.
embarrassed.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that kind of inventory, I think, is so helpful, with the prerequisite that try to have some amount of self-energy on board. To use an IFS framework, which is, I think, a nice practical one, is just checking in regularly of, can I notice in me any of those, like 8 C's, if you want to use the IFS framework, like curiosity, compassion, courage, confidence, any of those things. You can have 1 or 2 of them, and maybe that feels like, okay, yeah, I can proceed in the spirit of loving awareness to look at all this stuff and do an inventory. Because the one thing I don't want to do personally is take an inventory when I'm like triggered, flustered, like all the other parts may have the mic and might just have a heyday with what they see.
Right. Yeah, it's important to have a broad sample size over time and experience when you're doing these kinds of inventories. And I like the idea of sort of an energy audit in addition to the input audit, like you're talking about. So Maybe that's a reflection at the end of the day. Maybe you're jotting down quick notes when you are triggered, but not going into the full audit.
Yeah. Reflection at the end of the day when you have time to get in a good space to take an inventory. Yeah. Rather than in a traffic jam or something.
Right. Yeah. So does this charge me up or does this drain my battery? And if it was draining, is this a type of interaction that I'm okay with it being draining because I was giving my energy to something that matters to me? Or was I interacting with an energy vampire that was draining it from me against my will?
And of course, sometimes we don't have control over like the places and people we need to go on a regular daily basis.
Right.
Even if they are extremely draining, triggering, exhausting. And so that's, something else I just wanted to acknowledge and maybe bump back to you, Steve, of what does one do in the meantime, and taking an inventory and you're say stuck in this job or whatever, where negativity's like hard to shake.
Yeah. I might zoom out and ask yourself, could it be possible that I have more control than I think to leave an environment, to end a relationship, to end a job that I feel like I can't? Like start to think creatively about it. You might discover that you really are in a bind and it does make sense to stay in that relationship or that job. But then double down on what you can control. And a lot of that is what we're talking about here is like, well, I can control what I read in the evenings. I can control, what I eat. I can control whether or not I take a walk.
Yeah, my energy reserves, my kind of protective force fields, if you will, the health of my gardens going into this famine of good energy.
Yeah. Yeah, and to some extent, especially if I'm doing a meditation practice, I can control which threads of thought which seeds I water, I guess, to keep with our metaphor. Where I focus my attention. It's tough. And then you might have to also take an imperfectionist approach and like we were discussing and zoom out and admit and surrender to the parts of life that are not within your control.
Yeah. I had a therapist once, and I've shared this before, but probably because it stuck with me and it's been useful, is a therapist once told me, we were talking about kind of drama and situations that I just didn't want, or said I didn't want in life or whatever, and in the end it was this takeaway of just get out the popcorn, like be an active participant in the best way possible, of course, but also take a step back and watch it with a smile of compassion. And as it unfolds, doing what you can, but not getting destroyed by the fact that you have to ride out this storm for a while.
Yeah. I think a perspective shift that has helped me with that is trying to change the way I view challenge, the way I view what feels like failure, the way I view impositions on my time and my priorities. And instead of viewing them as tragedies, viewing them as opportunities for learning. And I'm not talking about what we've referred to many times on the show as toxic positivity, as just sort of silver lining everything. But I'm talking about sort of slowing down and trying to see opportunities for growth in these things that are really challenging. And so if I can get out the popcorn and sort of watch it with a bit of sort of compassionate mirth, then I might have an opportunity to learn. Whereas if I was pretty wrapped up in trying to avoid the pain or resenting that it's there, I might miss some of those lessons. Yeah,
it is hard to really learn and integrate things in fight or flight mode, or when your weapons are up, your defenses, especially in relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
So I've been also thinking about how we might get in our own way, or it's something another thing I like to take an inventory of when embarking on any kind of self-work. It's just like, okay, why am I doing this? What am I hoping to kind kind of work on, accomplish, start to cultivate by this path or practice? And what's it going to look like, but also how might I get in my own way?
Yeah. I think one way a lot of folks get in their own way when it comes to self-work is thinking that it is selfish.
Yeah.
That to invest in oneself, to do personal development work is selfish. That it's morally wrong if it's selfish. That to do it is to exclude your commitments to others. And it doesn't have to be that way. Sometimes it's called the paradox of selflessness.
Yeah.
Where we we enable our, we enhance our capacity to be in service if we tend to our own needs as a priority.
Yeah.
Like, I am a way better therapist if I've had a good night's rest, if I've had a chance to play, if I've prioritized fun and engaging in important conversations with the people I care about. Then I feel free to show up as my whole self and give of my whole self in the context of that relationship. But if I'm not doing some quote unquote selfish things, if I'm not really taking care of myself, then I really can't serve my clients in the way that I know I can. I'm capable of, rather.
Yeah. I had that I came face to face with that, I don't know, a number of years ago, maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I think it was in a church building. Someone told me that, yoga is selfish, like said it in a way that just like, made me question, like, just dedicating and like say an hour every morning to working on self, like just brought me into this like existential question head to head of like, wait, what is it? What is it for? But then, it didn't take very long to see, like, we work on ourselves, like we've talked about here, we work on ourselves so we can help others, like, and through helping others, we work on ourselves, and it's this beautiful cycle. But, perhaps one of the most selfless things we can do is take a pause, take these inventories, recharge your battery, sharpen your saw, so you can be the best version of yourself for everyone else.
Right. Yeah, and not just for everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
You deserve a better you as much as everyone else in your life deserves a better you. And I put quotes around better, just sort of healthier, more aligned.
That needed to be added, so thank you. It felt entirely incomplete without. And it brings the question of why work on yourself? Why?
Yeah. Well, sort of building on what I just said, I think it makes sense to work on yourself because you deserve it. That if it's possible by quote unquote working on yourself, that your life could be more enjoyable. This admittedly brief stint that we have in these spacesuits, in these self-conscious spacesuits.
4,000 weeks, says Oliver.
So if it's true that it's relatively brief, why not make it as pleasant and purposeful and dynamic and interesting as possible? And like you were just talking about, you do that. It enables you to be in service to others, but you are an other to somebody else too. Like we all are, in my opinion, deserving of the fruits of this particular kind of labor. So why not? Why not work on yourself?
Yeah. Amen to that. And it's liberation in the end. Like, we're talking about freeing ourselves of self and societal and other imposed limitations, self-limiting things, breaking free of these chains that bind us, if you will, the habits and patterns, the ways we pull back from life instead of dive into life. It really is liberation. We're like complete freedom to fully participate in your life.
There you go. Yeah, I think that's a really, really good way of looking at it. That to work on oneself is to be free to fully participate in your life, to be really present. And if that means setting specific goals that help you increase your physical health or increase your financial standing in the world, cool. But just make sure, like we've said many times, that those goals are in service of values that really make sense to you.
Yeah.
That help bring you closer to the wealth of the human experience, which is connection, which is making a difference in one's own life and the lives of others, to purpose.
Mm-hmm. There's this practice that shows up in a lot of different ways, but of checking in, like we talked about reflecting on the day. But I remember for a time when I was using this question of if you repeat it every day for the next year, just like today, realistically, where would you end up and how does that feel? Like you got to be in that self-compassionate seat to ask yourself that question. But one thing that I've taken away from sitting with that is there's a trap there of waiting until tomorrow or waiting until January 1st or whatever it is to start working on something. Like, oh, I did not succeed. All is lost today. So let's just let everything go to shit.
Right.
But there is another way of like, you know, I like to look at it each moment is a new birth, a new beginning, a new opportunity. And sometimes it really takes a pause to remember that. But it's just another thing I wanted to add, because it's so easy to get caught in what feels like a hamster wheel of just repeating things over and over that we start the day not wanting to, and then beating ourselves up at the end of the day and ending sad, hoping to do better tomorrow.
Right. Yeah. If I understand your point, I think it's consistent with the imperfectionist approach. You know, I think about the times in my life I've fallen off of my physical fitness habit or routine. And, you know, maybe I'm at work, I've just wrapped up a client and I think, you know, I really need to exercise. I got to make sure that I put together my plan. And so I'll make sure I wake up earlier tomorrow. Or I could just get down and do some push-ups right there, in that moment. Like, start now. Yeah. There's no better time than now to start dollar cost averaging, investing into something you want to see compounded.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really up to you to decide. And I encourage like a real whole body and soul check in on those of like, because I believe the answers are there in whatever way shows up for you of should I do some push-ups? Should I take a nap? Like there is an inner compass that will guide us. And we've talked about emotions as an example of this. Like they really orient us to what we need. Like, how are you feeling in the moment?
Yeah. Maybe just a few more fun ideas to think about when you're working on yourself.
Yeah.
So one is challenging your own certainty.
Yeah.
And that involves a certain degree of comfort with uncertainty, which is historically, I'll admit, been difficult for me. But one way I think about this is if you find yourself particularly wedded to a belief, go out there and find people who argue articulately and with integrity the opposite case.
Flat earthers. That's all right. I brought them up before.
He's on a flat earth kick. Yeah. No, but if you're of a particular political persuasion, like listen to people who are articulate and respectable that, you know, you can stomach, argue opposite or even antagonistic points of view. Yeah. And it's okay to hold your opinions, but maybe hold them loosely. And I found that when I've been willing to question my own certainty, I find that I like people more. Yeah. I can see their motives for why they believe what they believe, the story behind their beliefs. And I also sometimes change my mind. And I've been really thankful for those moments.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. It's especially coming out of a journey of kind of deep in religion. And then like we've talked about kind of exploring other paths and maybe having some aversion at times to too organized of structures, but then also missing some structure that helps you do your spiritual work, things like that. Yeah, there's this theory that I wanted to run by you that I've, stumbled across a number of times in the kind of adult development world, called the theory of positive disintegration. It's essentially another way of saying ego death. But this guy, Dabrowski, observed that the lives of most people are shaped by they start with an unquestioning acceptance and conformity to the norms that were given you by family of origin and society. And he calls that primitive integration. But then he talks about the theory of positive disintegration, is that mental growth comes from the ability to break these down. And the disintegration allows you to reevaluate your priorities. You find your values that are really yours and find what you really believe. So essentially an ego death that lets you reframe your identity and your beliefs and consciously choose of ways of thinking and behaving that more align with the real you. Mm-hmm. So it just strikes me as a theory that's kind of encapsulating in a paragraph, if you will, what we've been talking about, and the journey of waking up and growing up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I like this idea of sort of stress testing your beliefs, disintegrating them so that you can determine what the first principles really are that matter to you. And I was talking to a friend the other night about what it feels like to be able to speak from these foundational values and principles that you really, really can be convicted of, because they are consonant with your life mission, or they are consistent with sort of undeniable connection to self and who you feel like you are, and how different that feels, right? And you don't have to be an opinionated a-hole or dogmatic or resistant to being convinced otherwise, but there's a sense of confidence and clarity when you've done the disintegrating process and distilled.
Yeah. There is so much power and what other feeling am I trying to pinpoint? But like this power and calm confidence in knowing what you believe, while still holding the stance of like, this could all change. And, the more I learn, the more I know I don't know everything, right, and don't have all the answers, and that's okay. But to do the work of finding your beliefs is powerful. I think that's a takeaway from this positive disintegration, is like the way of thinking and making decisions that got you into maybe stuck places is not what will get you out. You kind of need to find this authentic version of yourself that has your own values, your own, like, that's real fuel to go through that process of questioning old beliefs, rejecting the identities that you didn't choose, that were just given to you, like these suits that you were supposed to wear, and on the way confronting your deepest fears so you can kind of abandon the need for so much external validation and move forward from a place that's true to you.
Right. Yeah, our listeners will be unsurprised to hear that this is one of the reasons why I am interested in the potential of psychedelics for healing, for personal growth,
for positive disintegration.
Yeah. You mentioned ego dissolution. Like, that's one of the things they do. They shake up the snow globe, and not appropriate for everybody, of course, and not an unmitigated good. Sometimes harm is done.
Don't smash the snow globe.
Right.
Don't drop it.
Don't shake it so hard that it explodes. But yeah, incredibly powerful tool. And there are other ways to alter consciousness, what we talked about many times on this show, to manifest the mind, as the term psychedelic implies, so that you can do that distillation process and figure out what do you want to peel away and discard, and what do you want to keep.
Like Jung called it, individuation, right? In fact, here's a Jung quote on the topic: "The fact that the conventions always flourish in one form or another only proves that the vast majority of mankind do not choose their own way but convention, and consequently develop not themselves but a method and a collective mode of life at the cost of their own wholeness. He says it harshly at times.
Yeah. The cost of their own
not
wholeness.
sugar-coated.
Yeah, it makes me think about that earlier point about just doing these practices of investing in oneself in order to help you be a deliberate human, like to be able to choose instead of being guided or jerked around by conditioning, like you were saying earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. So, because by just adopting something ready-made and making it your own truth and identity instead of finding what is really true for you. Like you try on things, right? But if you adopt things that don't fit or don't honor the real you, you're really disowning parts of your soul and kind of, distancing yourself from your real self in a way. And instead of like this process that Jung calls it individuation, is like finding your own answers to life, like, and bringing in all the input from others, but really finding them in you, and finding your own path, slaying your own dragons, instead of just kind of being a passive observer and passenger on someone else's ship.
Yeah. Well, I've covered most of the major points that I want to cover. Any closing thoughts, Reid?
Closing thoughts. Well, do you have any closing thoughts?
I feel compelled to just sort of return to the metaphor we started with, the investing in oneself. If you want to see compounded returns of a particular investment of time, of energy, of spirit force, whatever the hell you call it, be deliberate about it. And because you will get compounding returns on whatever you put your attention to. Those parts of the garden that you attend to will yield something. You want them to yield weeds or to yield, beautiful plants. All that being said, I think it really pays off to take an imperfectionist's approach to all this.
I love that. And maybe to try that on in closing, I could share a few versions of a mantra or affirmation that might be examples of how to go into a new moment, a new day, a new whatever with some intentional thing to work on.
Yeah.
For example, I will accept that I will be forever changing and creating myself, that I will never be a fixed or foregone conclusion. Or I will use mindfulness and loving awareness to make conscious meaning out of life's experiences. I do have some control over my thoughts, feelings, and actions. Or I will take full responsibility for all the circumstances in my life by doing what I can to make them better. There's no one to blame anymore. Or I will be more aware of the choices I make and accept that I alone am the captain of my own destiny. I will remember who I am in relation to others and be an authentic, separate individual. I will differentiate myself from others and let them experience the uniqueness of who I am. You could try a day like that.
Yeah.
And then maybe one more. I will use the rest of my time in this life wisely and accept the prospect of death. That is a concept that actually helps me live life more fully, practicing the mindful art of dying.
Yeah. I like these. And, if listeners, you were listening to some of those and some of them like, nah, not for me.
Nah.
Ooh, that's interesting. Or none of them. I think the idea of having some kind of heading or a mantra or a reminder that you return to daily, if not multiple times a day, could be really, really helpful. So if you want to experiment with this, just pick something. Come up with something that feels consistent with your values, something that you want to work on.
They have to be your own.
Yes. Come from the heart and take an imperfectionist's view on it and see what it yields.
Yeah, they have to be your own eventually, but like I certainly try on all sorts and then see how they resonate, see how they land, see how they feel, and what the fruits are.
Yeah. Well, here's to tending to your mind garden and investing in oneself.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Reid. Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers is brought to you by Numinous Network, a company committed to helping people heal and be well by delivering technology-driven clinic support, clinical trial research, and comprehensive practitioner training in psychedelic-assisted therapy. You can learn more about Numinous Network at numinous.com. That's numinus.com. If you enjoyed the show today and you want to support us, here's how you do it. You can leave a rating or review on places like Apple Podcasts and Spotify, subscribe to the Numinous YouTube channel, like the YouTube videos, and share the show with somebody you think might enjoy it. If you're interested in comprehensive training in psychedelic-assisted therapy, check out our courses at numinous.com/training. These courses are carefully crafted by Numinous professionals like myself, Reid, and others, and include live online classes, experiential learning, and opportunities to connect with a diverse community of practitioners in the psychedelic medicine space. I really love teaching these courses and connecting with you all, so check out numinous.com/training, and I hope to see you at the next training cohort. The content of this podcast does not constitute medical advice or mental health treatment. Please consult with a medical or mental health professional if you believe you are in need of mental health treatment.